In the shadow of towering skyscrapers and cutting-edge technology, an invisible crisis is unfolding in East Asia. Two economic powerhouses, Japan and South Korea, are facing a threat more existential than any economic recession or military conflict.
South Korea could follow the footsteps of Japan in its economic recession if it fails to realize structural reforms to keep up with the demographic change and to revive momentum for economic growth.
They are running out of people. Both nations are experiencing some of the lowest birth rates ever recorded in modern history.
South Korea is facing a demographic time bomb, grappling with the world's lowest fertility rate that threatens its very future.
Young families are becoming a rarity in South Korea, where the birth rate is the lowest in the world at just 0.7.
Setting them on a path that some experts describe as demographic suicide. This isn't just about fewer babies being born. It's about entire societies potentially disappearing. When a country's population doesn't replace itself, the consequences ripple through every aspect of that society, from economic stability to national security and cultural identity. Today we're examining the demographic crisis facing Japan and South Korea and asking a sobering question. Which nation is moving faster toward potential extinction? To understand the scale of this crisis, we need to look at fertility rates, the average number of children born to each woman in her lifetime. For a population to maintain its size, that number needs to be around 2.1. Anything lower, and a population will eventually shrink. Japan's fertility rate currently stands at approximately 1.3 children per woman.
Japan has one of the lowest birth rates in the world, with a fertility rate of just 1.3 births per woman.
This dangerously low number has remained relatively consistent for the past decade, causing Japan's population to decline by nearly 800,000 people each year, with fewer young people to replace an aging population.
The survey found that the older the population is predicted to be, the more they're worried about aging.
For Japan, it was 1989 when growth slowed to 0% range shortly before becoming an aging society.
Japan has become what demographers call a super-aged society. But as concerning as Japan's situation is, South Korea's is even more alarming. As of 2023, South Korea holds the unfortunate record for the world's largest fertility rate at just 0.78 children per woman. This isn't just below replacement level, it's catastrophically low. At this rate, the South Korean population is expected to be halved within the next 60 years. To put these numbers in perspective, the average global fertility rate is approximately 2.3 children per woman. Both Japan and South Korea have fertility rates less than half the global average, with South Korea's rate being about 40% lower than even Japan's troubling numbers. These demographic crises didn't develop overnight. Both countries followed similar paths that led to their current predicaments. Japan's fertility rate began declining in the 1970s after decades of post-World War II economic growth. Government policies initially encouraged smaller families as Japan rebuilt its economy. By the time authorities recognized the severity of the declining birth rate in the 1990s, social norms had already shifted dramatically. Despite implementing various prenatal policies, Japan has been unable to reverse this trend. South Korea's trajectory has been similar, but compressed into a shorter time frame. In the 1960s, South Korea promoted family planning to control population growth during its industrialization. The government's slogan was, "2 children is enough," as it distributed contraceptives nationwide. This policy was widely successful, too successful, in fact. By the 1980s, as South Korea developed into an economic powerhouse, birth rates plummeted. Both countries shared key factors in their demographic transitions: rapid economic development, urbanization, increased educational opportunities for women, and the high costs of raising children in competitive societies. However, South Korea's collapse in fertility has been faster and more severe than Japan's, suggesting that additional cultural and economic factors may be at play. In both Japan and South Korea, younger generations are increasingly rejecting the traditional life path of marriage and children. But what's driving this massive social shift? Economic pressures play a significant role. Both countries have developed highly competitive educational systems where children's success requires enormous financial investment. In South Korea, families spend nearly 12% of GDP on private education, among the highest rates globally. Similarly, in Japan, the average cost of raising a child to age 18 is estimated at around $250,000. Housing costs in major urban centers like Tokyo and Seoul have skyrocketed, making family formation financially daunting. In Seoul, the average apartment costs more than 15 times the annual median household income. Meanwhile, job security has decreased with the rise of contract and part-time work, particularly affecting younger workers. Working hours in both countries remain among the largest in the developed world. Japan's culture of overwork, known as karoshi.
Overwork in Japan is a real problem, and a deadly one at that. There is even a Japanese word for it, karoshi, meaning death from overwork, well above the government-defined karoshi line of 80 hours, essentially meaning a high risk of death from overwork.
And South Korea's intense work ethic leave little time for family life. South Koreans work an average of 1,915 hours annually, compared to the OECD average of 1,716 hours. For many young people in these societies, the math simply doesn't add up. The financial and career sacrifices required for family formation appear increasingly unattractive compared to the freedom of single life. Traditional gender expectations continue to shape family decisions in both countries, creating particularly challenging conditions for women. In Japan, women still face significant pressure to choose between career advancement and motherhood.
Japan has the worst representation of women in politics and business of any advanced democracy.
Once married with children, women are often expected to handle the vast majority of household and child-rearing responsibilities, even if they work full-time. This phenomenon, known as the second shift, has led many Japanese women to delay or reject marriage altogether.
And I think, too, for many women in Japan, there was not an interest in politics. That was a public space that was dominated by men, and women had the private sphere, the home.
South Korea faces even more rigid gender expectations. Despite having one of the most educated female populations globally, South Korean women encounter severe workplace discrimination. The gender wage gap in South Korea is the highest among OECD countries at 31.5%.
According to the Korea Women's Development Institute on this Wednesday, the nation jumped 13 positions from the previous year and now ranks highest in Asia. The Gender Inequality Index measures gender inequalities based on reproductive health, empowerment, and economic status.
After childbirth, nearly 50% of South Korean women leave the workforce entirely. The traditional expectations clash dramatically with the rising educational and career aspirations of women in both societies. Increasingly, women are choosing independence over marriage that would require significant professional and personal sacrifices. In South Korea, a growing 4B movement, no marriage, no childbirth, no dating, no sex, reflects young women's rejection of traditional family structures altogether.
Originally from South Korea, the 4B movement calls for shunning heterosexual bonds. The movement has 4 principles. Bihon, no marriage. Bishulsan, no childbirth. Bione, no dating. And bisexual, no sex.
If you're finding this analysis of East Asia's demographic crisis eye-opening, make sure you hit that subscribe button right now and turn on post notifications. Drop a comment below telling me which aspect of these population trends you find most surprising. The economic implications of population decline are already being felt across both nations and will only intensify in coming decades. Labor shortages have become a critical issue, particularly in Japan, where the working age population has been shrinking since the mid-1990s. Small businesses in rural areas struggle to find successors, leading to approximately 30,000 Japanese companies closing annually due to owner retirement with no replacement. In South Korea, similar patterns are emerging, with rural areas experiencing severe depopulation. The pension systems in both countries face imminent crisis. Japan's national pension fund, the world's largest, is projected to be depleted by the 2050s without major reforms. South Korea's national pension system could be exhausted even sooner, by the 2040s, due to its faster demographic decline. Healthcare costs continue to surge as both populations age rapidly.
Medical expenses have reached an all-time high, mostly as a result of the country's rapidly aging population.
Japan currently has the world's highest proportion of elderly citizens, with nearly 29% of its population over age 65. South Korea is aging even faster, from being one of the youngest OECD countries in 1990 to potentially having the oldest population by 2045. Both governments have attempted economic countermeasures, from Japan's Abenomics to South Korea's family subsidies, but results have been limited. The fundamental economic model that fueled both countries' rise, a large, productive workforce driving export-oriented growth, is becoming increasingly unsustainable. Population decline directly impacts national security capabilities in a region marked by significant geopolitical tensions. Japan's self-defense forces struggle with recruitment, meeting only 70% of their targets in recent years. With fewer young people available for military service, Japan has been forced to extend retirement ages and increase reliance on defense technology rather than personnel. South Korea faces an even more acute military challenge. Given its conscription system and the threat of North Korea, the pool of available conscripts is projected to shrink from 350,000 men annually to just 225,000 by 2040. This demographic reality is forcing Seoul to reconsider its defense posture and potentially accelerate military automation. Both countries are responding by increasing defense spending on advanced technologies, including AI, unmanned systems, and space capabilities, to compensate for human resource limitations. However, these technological solutions require highly skilled personnel, precisely the demographic that is shrinking most rapidly. The geopolitical balance in East Asia will inevitably shift as these population trends continue, potentially reducing Japan and South Korea's influence relative to neighbors with more stable demographics. Beyond economics and security, these demographic trends threaten the cultural continuity of two of Asia's most distinct civilizations. In Japan, rural depopulation is leaving thousands of villages effectively abandoned, with local traditions, festivals, and cultural practices disappearing as communities hollow out. More than 40% of Japanese municipalities are classified as depopulating, with some rural areas losing up to half their population since 2000. South Korea faces similar challenges, with its unique cultural traditions at risk as younger generations become increasingly concentrated in Seoul and its suburbs. Approximately half of South Korea's population now lives in the greater Seoul area, leaving other regions struggling to maintain cultural institutions and traditions. Language dialects, traditional crafts, and indigenous knowledgeable systems are all endangered by this demographic collapse. Both countries have established cultural preservation programs, but these efforts face fundamental challenges when there are simply fewer young people to carry traditions forward. Looking ahead to 2060, both countries face sobering demographic futures, but their trajectories differ in important ways. Japan's population decline is more advanced but relatively stable. Current projections suggest Japan's population will shrink from about 125 million today to approximately 87 million by 2060, a 30% reduction. Japan has had decades to adapt to its demographic challenges and has developed some institutional responses, however inadequate. South Korea's demographic collapse is more recent but significantly steeper. If current trends continue, South Korea's population could fall from 51 million to just 34 million by 2060, a 33% decline in a shorter time frame. More alarmingly, some projections suggest that if South Korea's fertility rate remains at current levels, its population could potentially fall below 10 million by 2120, effectively ending South Korea as we know it. While both countries face extinction risks, South Korea appears to be moving more rapidly toward demographic collapse. Its extremely low fertility rate, coupled with limited immigration and rigid social structures, creates a perfect storm of population decline. Japan, despite its advanced aging, has shown slightly more adaptability and has a larger population base from which to decline. That said, neither country has found effective solutions to their demographic crises. Both societies remain resistant to the large-scale immigration that has offset population decline in Western nations. Cultural expectations regarding gender roles change slowly, and economic pressures on young people continue to intensify. The future for both nations will depend on their ability to fundamentally reimagine their social contracts, creating societies where family formation is compatible with modern values and economic realities. Without such transformation, these technological giants face a future where their greatest innovation may be managing national decline with dignity. Japan and South Korea represent cautionary tales about societies that achieve remarkable economic development while neglecting demographic sustainability. Their struggles highlight how prosperity alone doesn't guarantee a nation's future. Societies need to reproduce themselves to survive. The demographic crisis in East Asia forces us to confront difficult questions about what makes society sustainable in the modern age. Can nations with ultra-low birth rates reverse their demographic decline? Is there a point of no return? The answers will shape not just the future of Japan and South Korea, but provide lessons for other nations facing similar demographic challenges. If you found this video informative, you won't want to miss our upcoming video.